So we have the plant and the plant cell and the animal cell side by side. So let's start with the cell wall. So what can you tell me about the cell wall? So we see that it is only present in the plant cell. Okay, so this has a protective feature. So Teresa mentioned it protects the cell. Anything else you remembered about the cell wall? Okay, so the cell wall keeps the shape. So basically the cell wall has a structural function. Okay, so Cleon, the semi-permeable nature belongs to the cell membrane and not the cell wall. So the cell wall actually is the fully permeable one. So if we had to do a comparison between the two, we can say the cell wall is fully permeable, meaning that most substances, if not all, can pass through the cell wall. So it's not very selective. On the other hand, the cell membrane is the one that's semi-permeable. So if we do a comparison, and this is important to know the differences between the cell wall and the cell membrane, because students tend to get these two mixed up. So you notice the cell wall is present only in the plant cell, not in the animal cell. We see the cell membrane present in both. So the cell membrane is the one that will control what is coming in and out of the cell. So to reach you said it traps things or stops them from getting in. So the cell membrane is the one that would have the control. So think of the cell membrane as like the security in the cell, making sure only certain things come in and certain things go out. So not any and everybody could pass in and out of the cell. So the cell membrane forms a barrier enclosing all the contents of the cell. So just imagine if the cell did not have a cell membrane. So that's why I said early on that the cell membrane is an important organelle, and every cell has to have a cell membrane. It can't be a cell without a cell membrane, because without the cell membrane, all the contents are exposed. Nothing would be kept intact. Everything is just exposed, and there's no barrier around the contents. So if we had to do a little comparison, so the cell wall we see is present in the plant cell only, cell membrane in both. The cell wall is mainly for shape, structure. So it has a structural purpose. So it helps to maintain the shape of the plant cell, keep its structure intact, and protects. So then we can also mention about it being fully permeable. So it is not meant to control what is coming in and out of the cell. That's not the purpose of the cell wall. So when we're talking about the cell wall is all about shape, maintaining shape, keeping structure, and protecting the cell. So in terms of the cell wall, the nature of the cell wall, we can say it is fully permeable. So pretty much anything can pass through it. So if you're looking at the cell membrane is really the barrier, the enclosure. And in this case now, the cell membrane is the one that is either semi-permeable or selectively permeable. So either one can be used, but I guess some teachers may prefer the use of selectively permeable. So only certain substances are selected for and allowed to pass through. But semi-permeable, selectively permeable, it pretty much mean the same thing. So all cells will have a cell membrane. The plant cell, along with some other cells, will have a cell wall, which we'll get to later. But for now, we're just comparing the plant cell and the animal cell. And the cell wall in the plant cell is made up of cellulose. And cellulose is a carbohydrate, a very complex carbohydrate. So it's going to serve a structural purpose And when we think of cellulose, when we eat plants, I'm just trying to make a little connection because when we go on to nutrition, I'm going to talk about this when we do enzymes. So when we're eating plant material, like, you know, fruits and vegetables, this would help contribute to the roughage or the dietary fiber inside of our body to help with bowel movements. And dietary fiber is indigestible. And that is because of the cellulose present in the plant cells, in the plant material, because we don't have any enzymes to digest cellulose. So that is why most of the time when you're eating any kind of plant-based materials, especially fruits and vegetables, oats and stuff like that, bran, that helps to contribute to fiber. So it's made up of a lot of cellulose material that we can't actually digest. We don't have the enzymes to digest that material. So just keep in mind the cell wall is made up of cellulose, so a very complex carbohydrate. All right, so let's get into the cell now. So we covered our exterior, so the cell wall, the cell membrane. So what about the cytoplasm? So we see that the cytoplasm makes up a lot of the inside of the cell. Okay, so question says the cytoplasm is a jelly-like fluid within the cell, and it is also where the chemical reactions occur. Exactly, thank you. So yeah, so it's basically a jelly-like substance. So it's really going to contain a lot of water with nutrients dissolving it. And this is where a lot of different reactions, chemical reactions are going to be taking place within the cell. So you can see that it's covering the majority of the space within the cell, and the other organelles are embedded in this cytoplasm. So I like to paint a picture of, say you have some jello. So I believe everyone should know what jello looks like. At school, then don't worry about the color so much, but say you had some jello and you put some M&Ms and different kind of candy and just kind of like stick it into the jello. Imagine the organelles within the cell. Imagine them embedded into the cytoplasm, like how those, you know, the candies would be embedded into the jello. So the cytoplasm has that kind of consistency. So it's not just water. It's not just a fluid, literally just a watery fluid. It more has the consistency like how jello would be. So you have these organelles, all the other organelles that you're seeing there are embedded into this cytoplasm. So that's where all the reactions would occur. So yeah, that's the main thing that you would mention about the cytoplasm. So a jelly-like substance. So that's where chemical reactions occur. So those are key things to know about the cytoplasm. All right, let's go on to the nucleus. So this is a very important organelle. Right, so this is the organelle that, so this is the boss in the cell, telling everybody what to do, controlling what activities take place in the cell. So is almost is like the brain of the cell. So just say our brain controls what we do. So both, you know, the voluntary and involuntary actions, you know, when we get to the brain, we'll go into that. But our brain tells us what to do, controls what we do. So the nucleus is responsible for doing that within the cell, right? And it contains the genetic material in the form of DNA. So the DNA is packaged in chromosomes. So the nucleus is extremely important because this is what is going to determine what type of cell it is. So when we go on to do specialization, cell specialization, it is the genes found in the nucleus that's going to determine what type of cell it is, if it's a red blood cell or a bone cell, a muscle cell. I mentioned red blood cell. It's funny I mentioned that first, but typically a red blood cell doesn't even have a nucleus. We are all aware of that the red blood cell is one cell in the body that does not have a nucleus. We're going to get into that when we get to the circulatory system. So that we will get to that in details later, but the red blood cell doesn't have a nucleus. the nucleus eventually disappears when the red blood cell matures. But typically the nucleus is what would determine what type of cell it is, what type of specialized cell it is, how the cell would behave, the shape of the cell, the functions. So the nucleus is extremely important. So we can see that that's present in both the animal and plant cells. So let's look now at these vacuoles, large and small vacuole. So we see it's large in the plant cell and small in the animal cell. And they tend to have different functions in each cell. So aside from the size of the vacuole, we clearly see it's much larger in the plant cell, much smaller and more numerous in the animal cell. But anyone can tell me what the vacuole does? Right, so it will tend to store the materials like water and nutrients. So especially as it relates to the plant cell. So just a little comparison here. So the plant cell will typically have a large vacuole because plants need a lot of water. So you know we water plants regularly. Plants need to have a lot of water to survive. We needed water for photosynthesis. So, and then obviously plants are not able to get up and move around to look for water like how an animal can. So they need to have a special storage for the water in the event that they're going through some hard times, rough times, and you're not getting rain, there's a drought. They still have the ability to store water. So like when a hurricane bulletin comes and they're telling us, oh, we need to go and stock up on water and canned foods and non-perishables, all that thing. It's similar here for the plant cells. They have this large vacuole to make sure they have a good storage of water in the event that they can't get access to water. So if the rain isn't falling, they still have a little storage to keep them for a little while. So the large vacuole will store the water and some sugars as well. So I mentioned nutrients, so you get some sugars particularly dissolved in this water. So stores water and sugars. Now, on the other hand, the small vacuole in the animal cell is more, the purpose for it really is to store waste materials that the cell doesn't need anymore before it can get rid of it. So in the video, they mentioned the lysosome. That's one that you don't need to know at this level. And they mentioned how it collects waste and cell debris. Well, these small vacuoles tend to do that to some extent too. They would store some of the waste. So in a sense, like a garbage can, storing the waste till it's ready to be sent out. So it's a little different function to the plant cell. So the plant cell is really about storing the water and the sugars for the survival of the plant. But in the small vacuole would tend to just store waste and whole cell parts and stuff like that. Anything that needs to be removed from the cell so it doesn't build up. So the large vacuole in the plant cell would tend to be more permanent. So it's like a permanent feature in the plant cell. While in the animal cell, obviously it's smaller and tends to be more temporary. So you'll see more of them and you may see more pop up depending on how much waste is collected, but they will be temporary. They don't last in the cell all the time. They're not gonna be there all the time because as waste is being removed, they will disappear. So those are between the vacuoles in the plant and the animal cell. So let's come down to the chloroplast. So the famous chloroplast, only present in the plant cell. So what is that?
You can't tell me that. Yeah, before the shut.
Okay, so the chloroplast will contain chlorophyll. So that's what makes plants green. So chlorophyll is the green pigment found in the plants. So that's stored in the chloroplast. So that's going to give the plant its color. Anything else to note about the chloroplast? Right, so this is where photosynthesis would occur. So those are two things you can mention related to the chloroplast. And obviously the chlorophyll is an important part of the whole photosynthesis process. So chloroplast is the organelle, which stores the pigment chlorophyll, which absorbs sunlight energy for the process of photosynthesis. So when you think of the chloroplast, you should be thinking of photosynthesis. So clearly you're not going to see chloroplasts found in the animal cells. So even if it's a lizard, we know a lizard is an animal, will have animal cells. You might be thinking, well, the lizard is green, it should have chloroplast. Definitely not. that pigment is not found in any chloroplast. That's just the pigment in the skin of the lizard. That has nothing to do with any chloroplast. It's not chlorophyll. So you only find chloroplast in the plant cells. All right, so coming down, we have the mitochondrion. So singular mitochondrion, plural mitochondria with the A at the end. So what do the mitochondria do? So we're seeing them present in both of the cells. Right, so the powerhouse of the cell. So what does that mean? Right, the site of respiration. And what does that mean? Right, so it's going to be involved, yes, in the breakdown of food and energy. So that's the key thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about the mitochondrion. So energy is released in the mitochondria. So it's manufactured and released in the process of respiration. So that's what the mitochondria do. So both of the cells would have mitochondria. So then we have two structures here that represent the food storage. Okay, so Teresa, you mentioned it outside the brain. So, okay, the mitochondria isn't going to be the one outside the brain. So as I mentioned before, the nucleus is responsible for that. The mitochondria is strictly related to releasing the energy, which is needed for all the different activities in the cell, because every process needs some, for the most part, needs some kind of energy to get done. Reactions, you're going to need some kind of energy for the cells to function. So that's the main purpose of the mitochondria. So we have these two food storage organelles here. So the starch grain in the plant cell and the glycogen granule in the animal cell. So these are just different forms of food storage. So a plant cell stores their food as starch. So when we go on to do photosynthesis, this will make a little more sense. So when the plants carry out photosynthesis, they produce glucose, and glucose is a carbohydrate, a simple sugar that can convert into starch. It can build up to form starch. So this is the way that plants will store their food in the form of starch. So when you think of a plant and the different areas where starch is stored, so the leaves, you come down to like the root. So when you're looking at root vegetables, they would be rich in starch. So is this food storage organelle in plant cells? Well, with the animal cell, we have a different form of food storage. So the animal cells store their food as glycogen, which is also a carbohydrate as well. So both of them are complex carbohydrates, so they're allowed to to store the energy, the food that the cell would need. So there are just two different varieties of food storage molecules. So that diagram showed you the main organelles that you should be familiar with and know to label. Another one that you need to know about is not on this diagram, and the dots might be confused for it. Ribosomes. Anyone remembers what the ribosomes do? So if I put in some, they're usually shown as tiny dots. So I know you're seeing the dots here on both diagrams, but these are representing the food storage. The ribosomes, right? So they're responsible for making proteins. So they synthesize proteins in the cell. So they also will be seen as tiny little dots. And if a diagram was to come in on the exam and they do have dots, more than likely those dots are the ribosomes. So you don't get confused. Yes, in this particular diagram, these diagrams here, we're seeing the food storage as dots, but based on CSEC diagrams over the years, to tell you the truth, I don't remember them actually asking to label the ribosomes, if I recall going through the past papers, but more than likely, those dots would typically be the ribosomes if you had to label them. So okay, let's summarize here. So these are the structures, the organelles that you need to know about. So that table just outlines each of the functions. So you definitely need to know to recognize the structures on the diagram, know their functions. So let's look at the bacterial cell now. So we just label the parts on the plant and an animal cell. So those are eukaryotic cells. We also have another eukaryotic cell to look at, but I'm going to get to that one a little later. The bacterial cell. So let's look at this typical bacterium. So it belongs to the category of prokaryotic cells. But what does that mean again? Just checking to make sure that we haven't forgotten what these terms mean. So prokaryotic versus eukaryotic. So a bacterial cell is a prokaryotic cell. And it literally belongs to the kingdom Prokaryota. So going back to classification. So what is a prokaryotic cell? What's special about a prokaryotic cell? Okay, so cells without membrane-bound organelles. So definitely want to make sure we got that clear. So we just looked at plant and animal cells. So they're going to have membrane-bound organelles. So cells without membrane-bound organelles. In other words, you're not going to expect to see any organelles inside of the cell that has a membrane around it. So what organelles does this bacterial cell have in common with plant and animal cells? So you should see some familiar looking structures, organelles there. And one of them has a different name. Let me see if it kind of put two and two together as to what that structure is that we covered already. But you will see some similarities. So what do they have in common? So in other words, what do all three cells have in common? Okay, so we have the cytoplasm. Okay, so the ribosomes. Right, so the cytoplasmic membrane. So you see it's now coming under a different name, a whole different name. But I figured that maybe if you realize that it means the same as cell membrane. So sometimes you may see plasma membrane. So these are like alternative names, just in case you see them pop up somewhere on the diagram and you're wondering what it is. It means the same thing. So cell membrane, you may see plasma membrane, or in this case, cytoplasmic membrane. So they all mean the same thing. So those are structures that all three of them have in common. So cytoplasm, the cell membrane, the ribosomes. So then you will notice some differences. So what exactly is this nucleoid? So it looks almost like the word nucleus, but it isn't a nucleus because we know that a bacterial cell doesn't have any membrane-bound organelles, and a nucleus is a membrane-bound organelle. So a nucleus is going to have genetic material enclosed by a membrane. But if you look here, the nucleoid is just simply a set of a collection of DNA, genetic material there in the cytoplasm without anything surrounding it, any particular membrane enclosing it. So think of the nucleoid as a makeshift nucleus. So it's not a nucleus. So you never say, oh, a bacterial cell having a nucleus, because that would be incorrect. It's called a nucleoid, thus meaning that we have DNA present. DNA present without any membrane around it. So that's what a nucleoid is. So that's distinctive to the other cells. So we can just see that the DNA is just literally there, collected in the cytoplasm, nothing particularly surrounding it, no membrane surrounding it. So we also have the cell wall. So this is similar to a plant cell. The only thing is that the cell wall is going to be made up of different material than it was in the plant cell. So in a bacterial cell, the cell wall is made up of peptidoglycan. In the plant cell, it was made up of cellulose. So that is a difference there. So in terms of the cell wall, we have, so made of cellulose in the plant cell, we have cellulose cell wall. In the bacterial cell, is made up of peptidoglycan, or sometimes you may see a word named murine, but I think this is a more common term. So that's something that they have in common, the cell wall between the plant cell and the bacterial cell. And then we have this special feature outside of the cell wall. So this is the yellow part. So the cytoplasmic membrane or the cell membrane is the first layer, the innermost layer, the cell membrane. Then outside that is the cell wall. But then even further outside that now is a capsule. So this is unique to bacteria. You're not going to find them in animal cells, plant cells. And the capsule is going to add a little extra layer of protection for the bacteria. So like when bacteria come into our bodies, for instance, we know bacteria causes infections, So bacteria, they want this extra layer of protection so that they're not easily spotted by phagocytes, which are part of the immune system. So that's a term we're going to look at when we get to the blood. So it's a type of white blood cell that tends to eat up anything strange coming into the body, any foreign organisms coming in. So the capsule will serve as a little extra protective layer. Not that it's going to stop it from being eaten up, but it has this extra protection layer there. And then also helps to stop it from drying out. So in the event like the bacteria say they're found in the soil, maybe they don't have enough water, the capsule will help to prevent that dehydration from happening. So it serves a protective function overall. And then we have these hair-like extensions. So this is different to the hair-like structures that were shown in the video. Let me see if anybody remembers. We looked at these hair-like structures that typically will line the mentioned the respiratory system. The word begin with C, and it kind of sounds almost like is not. This is the pili here. So the pili are these hair-like structures surrounding the bacterial cell. But in the video, they mention these hair-like structures that you will find on the cells that line the respiratory tract, and they help to just sweep away dust and mucus and so forth. Anyone remembers what those structures were called? All right, so maybe you didn't catch that one, but the structure I'm talking about are called cilia. So I brought it up because it may seem almost like the pili sounds similar to that, like it would behave similar. So cilia are the hair-like structures that would typically line the respiratory tract. So they have special cells, the epithelial cells that would have these hair-like structures. So that's really important in helping to get rid of dust and mucus and bacteria and all that. The pili now, as it relates to the bacterial cell, you have these hair-like looking extensions. So they're very similar. You don't want to get them confused. In this case, now the pili serves the purpose of attachment to surfaces. So bacteria need to be able to attach to different surfaces. So if they're found in the soil, they can attach to the soil particles. They can attach to other bacteria because sometimes bacteria will be found in like colonies. You have a whole population of these similar bacteria, and they can join together and attach to each other and literally form a whole clump of bacteria. So the pili can be helpful for attachment to the surfaces and other bacteria. So think of them as the attachment structures. So you see quite a lot of them around the cell. So I know the next one, I'm pretty sure everybody know what this was for. The flagellum. So what does the flagellum do? Okay, so very important for allowing movement for the bacteria. So some bacteria may have multiple flagella. This one has one. What was a structure, a cell found in humans and animals that also have a flagellum. Right, so the sperm cell. Good. So Kristen was paying attention to the video. Or maybe you just knew that. So yeah, so the flagellum is like it's literally like a tail. So using that whipping motion is gonna help the bacteria to move through whatever medium is going through. So very important for movement. So those are the key features there that you should be able to label on a bacterial cell and know their functions. So this just summing up those structures there. So we know bacteria are unicellular organisms, they're prokaryotic cells, so they're not going to have any membrane-bound organelles found in them. So no nucleus, but we have a makeshift nucleoid. They have a cell wall composed of peptidoglycan. They have the capsule for extra layer of protection, keeping them from drying out and phagocytosis. The pili, so these are the hair-like outgrowths for attachment to surfaces, and the flagellum for movement, locomotion. So they're going to have the cytoplasm, the cell membrane, like all other cells should have, but no mitochondria, no chloroplasts, no vacuoles, because all of these things have membranes surrounding them. So you shouldn't expect to see vacuoles and mitochondria and chloroplasts found inside of the bacteria. So that is our prokaryotic cell. So obviously it's a unicellular organism, is a microbe. So the next microbe you need to be familiar with, although I don't think I've ever seen, if I look back, I don't think I've ever seen a question come on the amoeba, to be honest, but it's on the syllabus, so you make sure you teach it. Yet, so you never know. They may pop it on you the next time. So we never know, but the amoeba is a eukaryotic microbe. So this is a eukaryotic cell, a unicellular organism. So that organism is just made up of one cell, so similar to the bacterial cell. Only difference now, this is a prokaryotic cell, sorry, a eukaryotic cell and not a prokaryotic cell. So this is going to belong to the kingdom Protists. So just making the connections. So we have the 5 kingdoms. We have the plant, the animal kingdom, Protists, prokaryotes, and then fungi. So those are the 5 kingdoms. So you're going to find the amoeba as part of the kingdom Protists or Protoctista. So this is a special type of cell. You're going to have the traditional organelle cell membrane. So it says membrane here, but obviously we're talking about the cell membrane. We have our nucleus. So you're seeing some similarities that you would find in the other eukaryotic cells, the animal and the plant cells. Of course, we're going to have some differences now. So the endoplasm and the ectoplasm are, they're like the cytoplasm within the amoeba. Just that the consistency of each is a little different. When you hear endo and then ecto, so that refers to the inside and then the outside part. So the more external and the more internal. So endoplasm, so this is related to the cytoplasm that's a little more found inside and is not as granular or grainy as the ectoplasm, which is found like around the exterior, the perimeter of the cell. So it really does cytoplasm with 2 kind of consistencies, if you want to look at it that way. And then we have a food vacuole. So this is how the amoeba is able to store their food. So they literally store it in this, like a vesicle in a sense, as a vacuole. The food will be stored there, and they'll be able to digest the food using enzymes and so forth. That's how they get the nutrients. So in terms of even getting the food, this is where these structures will come in, these pseudopods. So they're like they're the structures that are going to help grab hold of the nutrients and also allow movement for the amoeba. So pseudopod. So the word actually means like false foot. So as they think of feet that these organisms have. So it's going to help them to move as well as help them to trap the different food materials and that they need to take into cell. And the contractile vacuole, that part is really, that helps to balance out the amount of water and solutes found within the actual cell. So just maintaining like osmotic balance, and that will make more sense when we go on to look at osmosis and osmoregulation. So it's really going to be responsible for pumping the excess water and waste out of the cell. So if it's too much water in the cell, you got to get it out. If it's too much waste, you definitely got to get it out. If it needs more water, it will take in some more water. So it is a contractile vacuole. So we'll literally contract and allow more water in or out, more waste out. So those are the features of the amoeba. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna show just one moment, just so you get an idea of how the amoeba behaves, how it looks, how it moves. So I'm just gonna show a quick little video clip. This is a 30-second clip. So you can see that the cytoplasm inside is literally moving. It looks kind of grainy, like kind of like pebbles and stuff inside, but we can see how the amoeba changes shape. It's not going to be having a fixed shape because of these pseudopods, and they're going to be. So let me just play it again. So you can see the cytoplasm is moving and allowing for the formation of pseudopods. So those extensions that's going to allow it to move and take in food and stuff. So this is how a typical amoeba will look under the microscope. So you got an idea there. But as I said, I really can't say I've seen any question asking to label the amoeba. I don't think I've ever seen that before over the years. But with CSEC, we know they can surprise you. So we just want to make sure you know the diagram and the labels just in case. So this is just another diagram showing the parts. And here, listen out the main features of the amoeba. So we see the lysosome mentioned in this one in the amoeba. Obviously, the lysosomes are present in the animal cells as well, but it's not a particular organelle you really need to know about at this level. But it's just highlighted here within the amoeba. So we covered our cells, the different types of cells, the plant, the animal cell, the bacterial cell, the amoeba cell. So just to summarize and to go into a little more detail, let's look at the cell membrane and the cell wall. So we would have highlighted them when we were looking at the diagram of the plant and the animal cell. But it's important that you know key differences in terms of the structure and the function. So I've definitely seen questions where they ask to compare the structure and function of the cell membrane and the cell wall. Because I guess they figure, students tend to get them mixed up, but you want to make sure you know the difference between the cell membrane and the cell wall. So we know the cell membrane is present in all cells. So it forms the barrier around all cells, separating the exterior from the interior contents. So that's the purpose of the cell membrane. So it forms that barrier, and then we can also talk about the fact that is selectively permeable to control what's entering and leaving the cell. So only allowing certain substances to come in and out. Now, if you do the comparison with the cell wall, so the cell wall is not going to be found in all cells. Cell wall is only found in plant cells. I know we didn't mention fungi in terms of the structure or knowing, but fungi also have cell walls as well. And the material is made up of chitin. So in case you see that word before, oh yes, it's I have it here. So that's the nature, the material there of the cell wall in the fungi. So it's present in plant cells, fungal cells, as well as bacterial cells. So this is located outside the cell membrane, surrounding the cell membrane. And then, of course, we see the nature being fully permeable. So most substances, and they're making reference to water. Water is a very small molecule. So water and usually most small substances can pass through the cell wall. So that's what makes it fully permeable. So it's not responsible for preventing what's coming in and out of the cell. That is the job of the cell membrane. So the cell wall has nothing to do with controlling what is coming in and out. The main purpose of the cell wall is for structural support, maintaining the shape. It's important that you know what the cell wall does. It offers that protection, keeping the cell intact, especially when a cell is exposed to different concentrations. So keep in mind the cell wall is going to play a very important role when we're going to look at osmosis and how different cells behave in different concentrations. So the cell wall is going to play a very important role in that. So it really is really important in keeping the cell intact. So tough and flexible, providing that structural support, maintaining shape, strength. So we see the materials found in each of the different types of cells. So cellulose, cell wall in plants, peptidoglycan, cell wall in bacteria, and then the chitin cell wall in fungi. So going back to the cell membrane now, in terms of what the cell membrane is made up of, we can see is made of phospholipids. So you don't need to know the details of that until if you're going to do advanced biology, if you're doing CAPE or whatever, then you will go into more details of the actual structure of the cell membrane and how the phospholipids look. So that's just a little comparison between the cell membrane and the cell wall. And another two organelles you need to know to compare would be the mitochondria and the chloroplast, because they can often look very similar on a diagram. It's okay, we are now looking at these diagrams and they have some color. So clearly we can see which one is the chloroplast. But when you look on a black and white diagram, a CSEC brain black and white, they're not very clear. You need to be able to recognize a chloroplast from a mitochondrion. They often look very similar. So if you look at the diagrams carefully, you would notice that with the mitochondria, so both of them have double membranes. Let's start there. They're both double membrane organelles. So they have this inner and outer membrane. But one of the distinctive features of each, so if we start with the mitochondrion, you will notice that we have these inner folds. So those inner folds are the cristae. That's what's distinctive about the mitochondria. So anytime you see a diagram of the cell and you see these curvy inner folded lines within the structure, the oval shaped structure, you know that has to be the mitochondria. So if I had to do a quick sketch, so mitochondria would appear something like, so it might look something like that, or they got it in a little more detail, it may look something like that. But anytime you see those curvy folds, those inner folds that are curved, we know that that is a mitochondria. So you don't want to get mixed up between that and the chloroplast. On the other hand, you will notice the chloroplast has these, yes, they have the double membrane, but they have these stacks of membranes. And I like to call them like stack of coins. So say you had some 5 cents and you pull them up, you stack them up. Imagine that inside of the chloroplast. These are the thylakoid membranes where the chlorophyll is actually going to be found. So this is where the green pigment will be stored, any color. So when you're looking at a diagram of a plant cell, you're trying to identify the chloroplast. So the chloroplast may tend to look more like, you might just see like lines representing the stacks. So this is just a rough sketch here. But so you could be able to differentiate between the mitochondrion and the chloroplast. So it may appear looking something like that, just to show you that you have these stacks of membranes, these thylakoids. So yeah, so you want to make sure you know obviously the function. I think everybody should be good with function of the mitochondria and the chloroplast. So respiration in the mitochondria, so that's where the energy is made, and then photosynthesis in the chloroplast, so where food is produced. So you're only going to find mitochondria in, sorry, you're only going to find the chloroplast in the plant cells. Mitochondria you'll find in both. So these are different ways to help you to be able to differentiate between the two. So obviously if you see mitochondria, if you have two cells, the plant cell and the animal cell side by side, and you're seeing structures, the mitochondria in both, the structures looking like the mitochondria in both, well, clearly that can't be the chloroplast. But obviously right now you see a particular structure in the plant cell only, you don't see it in the animal cell, well then that would help you to figure out, okay, this one has to be chloroplast. So the third things you want to look for when you're labeling the diagram of the animal and the plant cell. So just to quickly wrap up, let's do a little comparison. So it's important to know the similarities and the differences. So I have just here between the animal and the plant cells, but you also need to know to compare the animal plant cells as well as the bacterial cells. So include them as well in your comparison. So what they have in common versus what they don't, or the differences. So this is a table that pretty much sums up the similarities and the differences between the plant cell and the animal cell. But you can also add on, if you wanted to add on a section for the bacterial cell, you can do that. So let's get to a practice question before we wrap up today, just to make sure everybody is good with identifying the structures on a diagram or diagrams of the cells. So we have these two cells side by side. So first of all, you need to be able to identify which one is the animal cell, which one is the plant cell. So we have 1 and 2. So which one is the plant cell, which one is the animal cell? Okay, so the plant cell will be 1. So you will realize that traditionally how the plant cell is usually shown is that it looks kind of box shape, rectangular shape. So keep in mind, not every plant cell is rectangular shape. That's how you will see it appear in the text. But it's a typical plant cell, but that's not to say that every plant cell looks like a rectangle. That's not the case, because plant cells come in various shapes and sizes as well. But typically when you're labeling just a general plant cell, it will look box shape. So that's how you can identify that is a plant cell. The animal cell will look a little more oval or rounded. So this one here will be the animal cell. All right, so let's get some labels. So let me just cross out one of them. We didn't do H. H is one that you would, I don't think that this is on the CSEC biology syllabus, but it's on the human and social biology syllabus, I believe. But H is actually endoplasmic reticulum. So that's one we did not go through today. I'm just going to put it here, label that, get that out of the way. So you see those elongated membranes surrounding E. So that's the endoplasmic reticulum. There are typically two types, but I don't believe you need to know this for this subject. So let's label the other organelles, and then we're going to wrap up for today. So let's see how fast we can get these cells labeled. See how good you all know your organelles, how easy you can recognize them. So A would be okay, so A is a cell membrane. B, right, the cell wall. So then we have C, cytoplasm. Right, so then D, we have the large and the small vacuole. So large vacuole in the plant cell, small vacuole in the animal cell. Remember the difference in terms of what they do? So let me just see. So what was the difference in terms of the function for the vacuoles? Okay, right. So the large one, which is found in the plant cell, that's the one storing the water, because we know that plants, they need extra water to store because they can't go and pick up and look for water like how an animal can. So the animal cell doesn't necessarily have to be having such large vacuoles to store water because it has the ability to get up and move and search for water if it doesn't find water in one place. But the plant cell, the plants can't do that. So that's why plant cells need to have that extra storage, that large storage of water. So then with the small vacuole, it's just really storing waste temporarily and getting ready for it to be removed from the cell. Okay, E. Okay, so E would be the nucleus. Yeah, so the large vacuole is permanent. So large vacuole in the plant cell permanent, small vacuole is temporary. So E is our nucleus. So where the genetic material is stored. F. Okay, so the chloroplast. So you see what I meant there when I did the comparison between the chloroplast and was G. Right, the mitochondrion. So clearly you can see in this diagram the distinctive features of each of them. So the mitochondria, as I said, once you see those curved membranes, those inner membranes looking curvy, you know that one is a mitochondria. The chloroplast, you're kind of seeing like these dotted lines, so that represents the chloroplast. Okay. So Cleanne and Soraya answered all those questions. I'm trusting the rest of you know your parts, your organelles. So we'll finish there for today.